Hello, nobody, because it's 6 o'clock in the morning. But I gotta get things done. So that's why we're live streaming this at 6 a.m. in the morning. If you're listening, if you're out there, if you're not out there, you'll hear it. You'll hear it later when I upload it to my podcast feed. That I promise you. Sam I Am Pelham is here. Sam, don't harass me, buddy. Come on, Sam. Please don't harass Spaniard during this presentation. Let's just listen and have a polite hi. How's that sound to you, Sam? Hope you're doing well, buddy. There we go. Sam I Am Pelham, being kind. Actually, Sam, that's one of the first messages that I'm going to talk about. So that fits in well here. I'm doing well, buddy. I'm doing very well. Give me 1 second. I got to share this. Boom. Shared. All right, Sam, you ready to rock and roll? Because I do not suppose many people are going to be signing in here because it is very... Come on, Sam. You're always busting my chops. It is pretty early here, so I don't expect many people to sign in. So I'm just going to get rocking and rolling. If you do watch this video live or on a replay, why don't you hop on over to iTunes, search Spaniard, subscribe. That would make me happy. That would make Spanny happy. All right, let's rock and roll. 1, 2, 3. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another What I Learned This Week live. Couple things going on here. First and foremost, thanks for tuning in. Always sincerely appreciate it. These are my favorite episodes to do. I'm recording a little bit later. I'm recording on a Tuesday of What I Learned This Week, which is actually last week because I was on a trip. I was on a trip and now I'm on another trip, and things are really fun, and I'm traveling around and it's really cool. And but anyway, that means that every once in a while I got to record a little bit late. So this is What I Learned This Week. Last week I had the opportunity to get down to Austin, Texas and spend a few days at the Onnit Academy with my friend and former UFC fighter, Kyle Kingsbury, who is turning into a mentor of mine. He's a friend of mine, but man, he is smart and he is well-read and he is at another level, and I just enjoy being around him. I enjoy picking his brain. Anytime I can be around Aubrey Marcuson, the people at Onnit, is a great time. I even got to hang out with Tim Kennedy a little bit and shoot some guns, so that was pretty fun too. Now I'm recording outside. I'm in a different place. I'm recording outside, and there are birds chirping. There are probably some eagles, as my son calls them, seagulls, flying around here. Maybe a little bit of wind, and I'm hoarse. So there's all these things because it's early in the morning. It's 6:04 a.m. and I'm live streaming because I got things to do today. So throwing all that out there, putting all that out there, I'm going to hop into this week's What I Learned This Week, and it's been fascinating. It really has been fascinating. I sent out my email yesterday or Sunday, and the title of the email was "Learning is Awesome." And I thought, you know what, I mean that, I feel that. But then I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, you know what, that's kind of like, I don't want to portray this picture of everything's awesome, everything's great, everything's terrific, because it's not. There's a lot of crap. I deal with crap just like everyone deals with crap. But the fact that learning is helping me get through that crap, the fact that reading books, the fact that having conversation is getting me through those challenges and obstacles and what ifs and forks in the road is really where it's at. And that's why I'm such a proponent of reading and of getting on top of this stuff, following along here, because that's really what it's about. Reading and learning and asking all these questions, this curiosity, it's getting me closer to the things I want in life. So it wasn't hyperbolic when I sent that email out. It was really sincerely true, because it is awesome and it's helped me get through that stuff. So let's dive into this week's What I Learned This Week. So Tim McGraw tells us, and if you're a fan and a follower of AMX, you've heard me sing it, always be humble and kind. You've heard me sing it on the intro and outro a couple times over the last couple months. But Tim McGraw tells us to always be humble and kind. Reminder, you can get this document, this What I Learned This Week document, to use with your team, your family, your company, your friends, whomever, at charliespaniard.com by opting into the email list. So Tim McGraw tells us to always be humble and kind. So I'm reading Stephen King's book, Stephen King on Writing, and I was referenced this book by Joe Rogan. I was listening to his interview. I believe it was with Kyle Kingsbury on Joe Rogan's podcast. So I got this book called Stephen King on Writing, and it's not a Stephen King novel. Honestly, I don't read Stephen King novels. I read mostly nonfiction, but Rogan said this is a mix of philosophy and a mix on this, like how you actually write. So I thought, I love both of those things because I'm a writer, I'm an author, and I love philosophy and how successful people get to where they're at. So I got this book, and in this book, Stephen King asks himself, so he's pondering writing this book, and he asks himself, quote, what made me think I had anything worth saying? This is Stephen King talking. And this isn't Stephen King talking 20, 30 years ago. This is Stephen King talking 10 years ago, or 15. I believe this book was published in like 01 or 02. What made me think I had anything worth saying about a book on writing? Of course, he has something worth saying about a book on writing. He's one of the best novelists of all time. I think it was like 52 million or 52 plus novels that he's written and X million sold. He's an incredibly successful guy. So what can we take from these two extremely successful people? Tim McGraw telling us to always be humble and kind. Stephen King asking himself what made him think he had a right to write a book on how to write. Of course he does. Let's take the lead from these two incredibly successful people and make sure we're humble. Let's incorporate humility into our lives. And I love this idea, moving on to the next bullet point, I love this idea of starting small. I love Journey. I love process. Not the actual band Journey, although I very much do enjoy Journey, so maybe I do love Journey. But I enjoy the journey and the process of anything. Whether you take a person, you know, Steve Martin's book I read not too long ago was a fascinating book because I love looking where people started and where they finished. Honestly, if you look at yourself as a human being, if you look at yourself as a life, as a whole life, whether you're a famous superstar or whatever, it's like the dings that you get along the way is really what I thrive on. And that's why I read so much, because it gives me perspective. So all these crazy hopes and dreams that I have and plans and impact and influence that I want to have on other people, it's tough to deal with on a daily, it's tough to have on a daily basis because it's so hard and the grind is so tough. But reading books and hearing these stories, you know, the most current one, Stephen King, it's really like perspective giving. In the book, he talks about the first thing he ever wrote and sold. And he sold 4 quarters for $0.25 apiece. He says this, 4 stories, $0.25 apiece. That was the first buck I made in the business. So even the best start small. That's the message. That's the takeaway from that little bullet point there. 4 stories, $0.25 apiece. That was the first buck I made in the business. Even the best start small. Even the best are playing small at the beginning. Even the best are you know, don't start at the top. They start at the bottom. And there's a reference later on in the book that I don't know if I'm going to top out on AMX or not, but I'm a good bit of the way through the book. And he said in an interview, someone said, how do you write? And he said, 1 word at a time. And really and truly, that's the underlying theme, the lesson, the principle is that this is bit by bit. Moving on to the next bullet point, I'm talking about AMX Kids 3. So if you're a parent, if you're a coach, if you're a teacher, if you have any sort of influence on young people, on middle school age is the demo that I'm aiming, but it works a couple years older and a couple years younger. I read books, right? You know that. I read books all the time. I thrive on books. It's a part of my daily life. I also want to impact young people. So what I started doing was reading middle school age books. I'm teaching life lessons. Look, I was a teacher. I was a Spanish teacher. I interacted with junior high kids, right? Mostly 9th and 10th graders, but 7th through 12th graders. That's what I did. I taught them Spanish. Something they didn't want to learn. I did my best to make them want to learn Spanish, but I would always say to the kids back then, I'm a teacher of life with a specialty in Spanish. Now I'm simply teaching life. So if you have a young person in your life, the goal of AMX Kids is to, 1, encourage reading, because reading will get you what you want. Reading is extremely important. It's an extremely important success habit in general. Also, I want to teach life lessons. I want to teach leadership. I want to teach character skills. I want to teach doing the right thing. When a kid is on the fringe, put it this way, when a kid is on the fringe and they're deciding between right and wrong, this path, which is the right path, and that path, which is the wrong path, I want them to have this AMX Kids, or maybe a thing I said in AMX Kids. I want them to have that in their mind. It's kind of like a piece of armor or a next combination to win that little mental battle and go in the right direction. So if you have a young person, please pass them on. This week, actually today, Tuesday, when I'm when I'm recording this episode, is when AMX Kids 4 comes out. I'm reading the book Hatchet. I'm wrapping it up today. I'll be starting a new book next week, but new episodes are released every Tuesday. And again, it's simply teaching life lessons through middle school age books. And I want to make reading fun. I want to make reading cool. I want to make kids believe and realize, not believe, I want to make them realize and believe that reading is an extremely important thing. So please pass on AMX Kids to those young people in your lives. How many times have you heard fail forward, fail your way to success, failure is a part of success? The more you start reading books, the more you start diving into these careers of extremely successful people, you'll realize that is the name of the game. That is one of the most commonly talked about, commonly discussed, commonly written, commonly recorded ideas and themes out there, that you cannot succeed without failure. No one is impeccable in entirety. No one out there. It's impossible. You will fail. You will fall short. You will get smacked in the face. You will get knocked out, maybe literally on TV against Danny Castillo. You just never know. But Stephen King's talking about this, and he's talking about the early rejection of his writings early on in his life. And he started writing when he was young. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. It was 6, 7, 8, 9, something along that. But he says this, quote, "By the time I was 14, listen to this. By the time I was 14, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of the rejection slips impaled upon it. I replaced the nail with a spike and went on writing." That's it, my friends. By the time I was 14, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of the rejection slips impaled upon it. So he would get a rejection slip from a magazine, a publisher, whomever, and he would take it and he would stick it on the wall. And he said the nail in my wall would no longer support that weight by the time he was 14. Replaced the nail with a spike and kept on writing. So it's just like this idea. There were so many close calls in this book, right? And I recommend you read this book. I recommend you read every book that I read. There's a point in this book where he's talking about the almost and never wases. The almost never wases. Let's put it that way. The almost never wases. Where some of these books, Carrie, which I believe was his first published novel, he threw it in the garbage can. He threw Carrie in the garbage can, and his wife found it and said, "I think you might have something here." And so he ended up submitting it and then getting a deal for it and made his first real money with Carrie. So you just never know. You just never know when that next thing is there. There's an adage, and I think it's a true story. But anyway, it's about a guy in California who's digging for gold, and he gets I think 6 inches from gold, and then he stops, and then a new guy comes in and he digs 6 inches and he finds gold. So you truly just never know. So the moral of that story is just keep on keeping on, my friends, just like Stephen King. So if I would ask you what turns your dials up to 10, what turns your dials up to 10? So what do you like? What do you love? What are you passionate about? What fires your engine? What turns your dials up to 10? So talking about his upbringing, his youth, getting into high school and even college, Stephen King says this, and this is about sci-fi and monster movies, scary stuff. He says, quote, "This was the stuff that turned my dials up to 10. This was the stuff that turned my dials up to 10. Now, reading this book, reading that, think about dials. What turns my dials up? I'll tell you what turns my dials up to 10. Training, reading, learning, teaching, interacting, being on stage. That's what turns my dials up to 10. So I'm creating my life such that I'm able to do those things for a livelihood. I was listening to an interview, I believe it was with Dr. Andy Galpin on the Onnit podcast with Kyle Kingsbury is the host of it. So I'm consuming a lot of that stuff. And he said something to the effect of, people look at my life now and they say, and this is him speaking, he said, people look at my life now and think, wow, that's awesome or that's lucky. He said, but he created his life such that that is his reality. So he had a goal, he had a vision, and he started working on that vision day by day by day, little by little, to get to this end point of where he's at now. I'm doing the same thing, and I'm suggesting, I'm raising the question, I'm asking you, what turns your dials up to 10, and how can you do more of it? Is it exercising? Is it reading? Is it playing an instrument? Is it drawing? Is it creating music? Is it painting? Is it something obscure that people are doing online and you could do too? Whatever that thing is, ask yourself, look yourself in the mirror this morning, When you wake up, if you're live streaming and you're brushing your teeth or you're driving, pull over and really put your thought to that. What turns my dials up to 10? How can I do more of it? Where along the lines of my life and my path did those things that turn my dials up to 10, when did they get squashed? I have a 4.5 and a 1.5 year old, soon to be 5 and 2, and I watch them, and I'm thinking they just love it. They love everything. They're just full of life and energy and vigor and zeal, and then at some point, most people just lose that. They have that thing. I had that thing. You should have that thing. Go find it. Answer that question. What turns your dials up to 10? And then do more of it. Speaking of my kids, that was a nice segue. A nice segue. Speaking of my kids, so we're driving a couple months ago. Actually, we're not quite driving. We're getting in the car. We're at my parents' house. We're taking a 2.5 hour trip back to my house, and my son Rocky is just hysterical. He's screaming. He's furious. Right? This kid has fire. This kid has just. Well, I was going to try to think of another adjective or another word to say there, but no, he has fire. He goes from 0 to 100 in a second. Right? He's trotting along happy. Sees something he wants, and he wants it now. Or he can't have something he wants, and he lets you know about it now. That's the type of kid he is. So we're strapping him in the seat, and he's hysterical, screaming, yelling, just going like, blah, fire. And my wife turns on the car, and this song by a woman named Laurie Berkner. Laurie Berkner creates kids' music. She's a singer. She plays music. The Laurie Berkner Band, LaurieBerkner. I have a link to it in this week's PDF of the What I Learned. Anyway, mid flip out, Rocky stops and starts singing. I'm not kidding you. It was like, picture a tantrum that your son or daughter has thrown in their lives, and then picture flipping a switch and having them go from to so he's singing this hello, anybody there? Anyway, that's Laurie Berkner, and it was at that moment that I said, I've got to have her on my podcast. I've got to talk to Laurie Berkner. So I just cold reached out. I found her on Twitter. I reached out. I explained who I was. I explained why I wanted. I think that's an important mini lesson here about approaching people. Just be honest. I just said I'm absolutely fascinated by your music. My son Rocky was screaming his lungs out one day in the car, putting your music on. He stopped dead in his tracks, started singing with a smile on his face. We've listened to your music since my daughter was born. I would absolutely love to talk to you and learn about it. That was it. And she responded. And we had such an incredible conversation. It was one of my favorite conversations, and it was so off the wall because here I am, I'm talking to Laurie Berkner of the Laurie Berkner Band, who plays kids music. It's Victor Vito and Freddie Vasco. They ate a burrito with Tabasco. They ate their rice, they ate their beans, they ate their rutabagas, and they ate their collard greens. Hey Victor, hey Victor. So that's the music she creates. We had a conversation, over an hour conversation that was so incredible. Not to mention my daughter got to sing to her a little bit at the beginning of it. There were so many parallels between what she does and what I do or what I did with professional fighting. So many parallels with creation. I'm picking her brain. I'm learning from her on creation, on messing up on stage, on where the creativity comes from, where these song lyrics come from. We talk about life, we talk about business, her starting small, her selling 4 stories for a quarter, metaphorically speaking, but how she got from point A to point B, and it's truly fascinating. And what we dive into a little bit about the kids, and I'm going to read a quote from our conversation, but it falls in line with what I was saying about what turns your dials up to 10 and how kids are basically operating on those things all the time. She says this, quote, "What's lost is our ability to just have the feeling and then move on from the feeling. Kids can do that still because they're not worried about having to stop themselves in the first place. That's one of the most beautiful things about being a child and tapping into the inner child. If you take the cliche out of that, it's something that adults could really learn a lot from." So what I take from that quote is, how I look at my kids and I just see them wander and I just see them discover and I see them smile and laugh and be mad and be sad and then move on from it. I think what she's saying, what I take from that quote is that we lose our ability to do that and we cling to stuff and we build up this plaque or this tartar or this, hard water calcium within us. And she's saying that one of the most beautiful things about being a child is that they are not like that. So I'm going to end this little segment here by saying you need, if you have kids, to check out Laurie Berkner at laurieberkner.com, LaurieBerkner. You will, I was going to say you will not be disappointed. That's not how I want to say it. I'm going to say you will be amazed at this music. She's on YouTube. She's streaming on streaming services. Do yourselves a favor if you have young people, kids in your life, and listen to that music. It'll make your life happier and more peaceful, I'll tell you that much. And lastly, I'm going to throw a question at you that I got from my friend Kyle Kingsbury. Like I said, I fought with Kyle in the UFC. We traveled overseas. We did a UFC. We did a tour for the troops. We traveled to all kinds of Middle Eastern countries back in 2012 and really grew a bond, and I became really curious of him because he's such a big Hulk. He really is like a Greek god, to be honest. If you don't know Kyle, do a Google and you'll see that he is. But he's so smart, so well spoken. He actually carries a fanny pack and paints his toenails and wears Speedos a lot. So he's an incredibly complex guy, super interesting. But I was down in Austin the last I think Wednesday through Friday it was. And I was just picking his brain about life, about learning, about all kinds of subjects. He and his wife, Natasha, who are, they're both super welcoming, and their son, Bear. And I'm just learning from him. And he's very spiritual. And spirituality is something that I'm getting very, very much into. Reading books on it, learning about it. And basically, I did a Google search because I want to know what is spirituality. And it's basically a connectedness to something bigger than yourself. So it's kind of like I'm searching for like, why am I here? What am I doing? What's my mission? What's my purpose? You hear people talk about that stuff all the time. But anyway, Kyle is kind of my guide or my the recipient of my questions that go in many directions. But he said he had an experience where someone asked him, who has been your greatest teacher? So right now I'm asking you, listener, who has been your greatest teacher? All right? So you have that person in your mind, or maybe you want to hit pause and think of who that person is. Now here's the second part of that question. Now, consider who has been your greatest teacher, both good and bad. So that changes the way you think about it. The first part of that question, who has been your greatest teacher? Now, consider who has been your greatest teacher, both good and bad. First part of that question. And I want to show you how this differs and why it does you good mentally, spiritually, emotionally to think through that. Who has been your greatest teacher? If you would ask me that question, I would say my mom and dad. Boom. Who's been your greatest teacher? My mom and dad. Simply put, that's the most obvious answer. Now consider who has been your greatest teacher, both good and bad. I would say the sport of wrestling. The sport of wrestling has been my greatest teacher, both good and bad. Because when you first ask that, when you ask that question the first way, you just think, oh, my greatest teacher, boom, good. He was my greatest teacher, she was my greatest teacher, that's it. Now when you throw in that both good and bad, it adds a whole other dynamic to it. And this would be a great question to use with your team, with your group, with your classroom. Both good and bad, that's the sport of wrestling. The sport of wrestling has taught me some really great stuff, and the sport of wrestling has broken my heart more intensely than anything has ever broken my heart. So thank you very much for Kyle Kingsbury for that question. Listeners, I encourage you to actually play with that question. Use it. Have a conversation about it. And lastly, thanks for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate you turning into what I learned this week. I love these episodes. It's fun. It's a way for me to categorize and systemize my learnings even further than AMXweekly, even further than my journaling. So please hop on over to charliespaniard.com. If you'd like to bring some of this learning to your team, to your school, to your group. Excuse me, I need some agua. Hold on one second. Please visit charliespaniard.com. Check out the booking, opt in, the email address, opt in to my emails that go out. And how about you check out my reading list, charliespaniard.com/reading list. You can get this book, the Stephen King book, as well as every other book that I've read that is literally changing the way I live my life. And I'm going to send you out with this. Because I went to Onnit, because I was around Aubrey Marcus, who created Onnit, who wrote Own the Day, Own Your Life, which I spoke about on this podcast. I'll give you a clear-cut example of how reading changed my life. In that book, they talk about the benefits of cold therapy, the benefits of cold water, ice baths, dealing with longevity, dealing with immunity. So every single day when I take a shower and I rinse in the shower, I reach for the knob, I do a mental override. which is something that Aubrey got from his friend Bodie Miller, skier. And I crank it all as cold as it goes, and I rinse off for, I don't know, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes in the ice cold water, which I used to hate. And now I absolutely love it. So that is exactly a takeaway. That is a perfect example of a takeaway you can take from a book, how it can change the way you behave and how it can enhance your life. Be bold, my friends. Alrighty then. So we gotta upload this, and then we're gonna roll. We're gonna roll right into AMX. I gotta make sure we got audio there. How it can change the way you behave and how it can enhance your life. Be bold, my friends. Perfect. Perfecto. All right, everybody. I'm going to sign off here. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm actually going to sign on here in a couple minutes, I think, for AMX. So I'm going to sign off, do some quick uploading, and then I'll be back, I believe, unless my kids wake up, in a couple minutes for AMXweekly 527. See ya.